Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 14. All episodes are available in both video and podcast format at myweekinbaseball.com or subscribe on YouTube at My Week in Baseball. And thank you to Rose Petal Studios for the artwork and logos created especially for this show and website. You'll find Rose Petal Studios on Instagram at rosepetal_studios. Also, thanks to Brunjo Productions in Nashville for our intro music. Learn more at brunjo.com. Well, today we've got an action-packed episode for you, including a new idea for the playoffs in which the Mariners would have actually made it, and whether or not the M's are doing their fans a favor by missing the playoffs and trying to win just 54% of their games. Carlos Correa's great play against the Blue Jays. Did the shift band work? A baseball book review, and our blast from the past featuring baseball legend Brooks Robinson. Of course, we'll also have a trivia teaser and a timely limerick, our baseball limerick, along the way. So let's get right to it. Okay, we'll start off with today's trivia question. It's been 30 years since the 2003 season. In that season, what team set their league's record for most losses in a 162-game season? And for bonus points, without looking it up now, how many losses did they have? Was it the 2003 Padres, the 2003 Royals, the Mets, or the Detroit Tigers? We'll have the answer for you a little later in the show. Next up, something to honk about. So Jerry Dipoto, front office executive for the Mariners, recently stated, quote, "We're actually doing the fan base a favor in asking for their patience to win the World Series while we continue to build a sustainably good roster." He also said, if you go back and look, in a decade, those teams that win 54% of the time always wind up in the postseason. And the truth is, they don't always wind up in the postseason. But he's right. Most of the time, almost all the time, if you win 88 or more games, you'll make the postseason, especially with the expanded playoffs that we now have that include 12 teams. However, this year, the 88 wins fell just short as the Mariners lost out in the final week to the Houston Astros and the Texas Rangers. In fact, they finished 2 games behind the Texas Rangers and Houston Astros in the American League West. Now, if they had won just one more game in the final week, because they played both Houston and Texas during that final week, they could have had a 3-way tie with all 3 teams winning 89 games, meaning one of them still would have missed out due to the way the tiebreakers worked. So this season, at least in the American League, winning 90 games was the benchmark for making the playoffs. Unless you were in a very weak division. The Minnesota Twins actually made the playoffs with only 87 wins, but finished in first place. So that was enough for the Twins to make it. So most of the time, the 54% winning would be right. If you actually won 88 games a year, a lot of times you would make the playoffs, but not this year. Dipoto also said, nobody wants to hear the goal this year is we're going to win 54% of the time. Because sometimes 54% is, well, one year you're going to win 60% and another year you're going to win 50%. It's whatever it is. But over time, that type of mindset gets you there. And I think he's right about that. Nobody wants to hear you're trying to win 54% of the games. I've actually heard that some places in Seattle are now printing up T-shirts that say 54%. I think he may have been over-criticized for this. It's just the way it comes across. He's really trying to say, and he explains this further a day or two later in an interview with seattlesports.com, and he apologizes and he tries to clarify his comments. And in it, you understand more what he means. In it, he says this: if you look back over the history of baseball since the divisional format came in 1969, in decade-long segments, teams that averaged or achieved 54% winning over a 10-year period or greater, they wind up in the World Series and consistent members of the postseason. That actually makes a lot of sense, and I appreciated his explanation. And I am a Mariners fan. As most of my longtime listeners know, the Tigers are my number one team, but I do like the Mariners. And I think if you take his words for what they really mean, I think what he's really trying to get across, we're trying to build a consistent winner. But it sure sounded like it came across as we're just trying to win 54% of our games, right? So we're not going all in. I think that's the feeling. We're not going all in. We're just trying to win 54% because that should get us in. But really, he's saying that over long periods of time, if you can build a team that averages winning 54% of the time, some years they'll win more, some years they'll win less, but over time they'll do very well. They'll make the playoffs frequently, and they will sooner or later end up in the World Series. So I think he took a bigger hit on that than he should have, and I appreciate his explanation a couple of days later in a follow-up. Now, he did also clarify some wording he had about signing free agents, and this is also a quote: adding a big star is much easier when you develop the big star. And in that case, he's talking about Ken Griffey Jr. or more recently, Julio Rodriguez. And continuing the quote, acquiring a big star from outside is also contingent on the big star. So I can't guarantee you when that will happen. So he's saying there, of course, the star player needs to want to come to his team, needs to want to come to Seattle. I think that's kind of code, though, for, yes, he's right. I mean, home growing your stars is better. You've got that long-term commitment. The fan base sees them coming up as a rookie. There's a lot of reasons, and it costs you a lot less in the early years of their contracts. There's a lot of reasons why a homegrown star can be a better way to go. But it sounds to me like coding for, we're not going to sign Ohtani. Oh, he would have to want to come here. Of course he would. But if you were agreed to pay him $500 million over 10 years, I think there's a decent chance he would come. And I think Seattle would be, in my opinion, one of the teams that Ohtani would consider going to. But I think from my point of view, it kind of was like, well, we're not really going after the top stars. And that hurts. I get it to some extent. You're trying to do the things that keep you a consistent winner, that keep you getting to the playoffs on a regular basis, not every year. It doesn't happen every year. But if you do that over time, you will have a winner and you will go to the World Series. It just, as a fan, what do you want to hear? You really want to hear, we're going all in. We see the next 2 or 3 seasons as our key with our young stars coming up. And we're going to, do what we can to sign all the best players. So it was interesting. If you have a chance, look it up and listen to what he has to say and see how you judge it for yourself. I certainly understand it coming from the mindset of a front office person, how you would approach the game. But from a fan perspective, it's hard to hear that kind of thing because it just comes across like we're not going all in. Maybe, and I think to my recollection, Dipoto has a history of making he's almost too truthful. And so it doesn't always come across well. They almost need like a director of communications to say, hey, Jerry, I'm going to do the talk with the press today. Tell me the key ideas you're trying to get across, and I'll find a way to say it in a fan-friendly manner. So maybe that would be another way to approach it. Anyway, on to my next topic, which is related. And that topic is, how would the Mariners have made the playoffs this year? And you'll notice if you're watching on YouTube, I am wearing a Mariners cap. And if I can turn the camera down here a moment, I also have a Mariners t-shirt on today. This happens to be a Ken Griffey shirt. So how would the Mariners have made the playoffs this year? They did win 88 games. And as I pointed out, that was more than one of the AL teams that made it, the Twins, and actually more than a couple of teams in the NL. So back in March of this year, 2023, I posted a blog article titled MLB Playoffs and World Series Reimagined, in which I suggest a new approach whereby the AL and the NL affiliations, the league affiliations, no longer really matter, and that after the 6 division winners, you should take the next best 6 teams regardless of league. So still 12 teams to make the playoffs, as in the extended format that we have now, the 6 division winners, then the 6 next best team, regardless of league. So this year, the division winners were the Baltimore Orioles, Houston Astros, and Minnesota Twins, who I've already pointed out won one less game than Mariners did. And in the National League, the division winners were the Atlanta Braves, the LA Dodgers, and the Milwaukee Brewers. The next 6 best teams include 4 that did make the playoffs anyway. So in order of wins, those 4 are the Tampa Bay Rays, they had 99 wins, the Phillies, 90 wins, the Rangers, 90 wins, and the Blue Jays, 89 wins. So those teams would all make the playoffs as they actually did in real life, and also in my reimagined format. All of those teams won more than the Mariners. The Mariners' 88 games this year were exactly 54%. But there were 2 teams with less wins that in real life made the playoffs this year. Those are the Miami Marlins and the Arizona Diamondbacks. Both of those teams won just 84 games, which is only 52%. It just so worked out the way the standings fell in their league, they managed to make the playoffs. So in my scheme, one of them would have been out. And if you go by how they did against each other, known as head-to-head games, well, the Diamondbacks lose. They lose out. They had won just 2 of their 6 games against the Marlins this year. So that would make the Marlins the last of the 12 teams in my playoff proposals, and the Mariners would have made it. The Mariners would have made it. The Diamondbacks would have been out. And that means that Seattle, because they're an American League team, would join my playoffs, while Arizona, a National League team, would be out. So there would actually be more American League teams in the playoffs this year based on my proposal. There'd be 7 and only 5 teams from the National League. But please read my blog post from March 5, 2023 for all the details where I propose how the teams would be seeded and ultimately how you could have 2 teams from the same league face each other in the World Series. And I think that could be very exciting. If you think about, you could have the LA Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants in the World Series. You could have the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees in the World Series against each other. That would be pretty exciting. And I also talk more about this proposal in episode 5 of this season of the podcast, season 2, episode 5. So look back to those for more information. Next up, Carlos Correa gets Bo Bichette on a broken play. So this was in the first round of the playoffs this year, the wild card round, Minnesota Twins against the Toronto Blue Jays in game 1. So let me set the scene for you. And this is an amazing play. It is the top of the 4th inning. The Minnesota Twins are leading 3-0. There are 2 outs. The Blue Jays have runners on first and second. Bo Bichette is the runner at second base. The batter, Jays center fielder Kevin Kiermaier, hits the ball, which bounces hard near the plate and then takes a high hop toward third. The Twins' third baseman, Jorge Polanco, races in, but just as he reaches the infield grass, the ball scoots under his glove. Now, by this time, Bichette is rounding third and he's heading toward home, and it looks like he might make it. But then Carlos Correa has been shooting over toward third base from his shortstop position, and he picks up the ball barehanded on the dirt near third base. He throws off balance and sidearm to the plate. Bichette slides headfirst. The Twins catcher, Ryan Jeffers, reaches over and tags him on the back just as Bichette's left hand is inches from the plate. The call? Out. Bo Bichette is out at the plate. It's a stupendous play by Carlos Correa, backing up his teammate at third base. And an interesting tidbit, the play is actually scored as an infield hit for Kiermaier, but it's the third out of the inning, and the Jays' threat is ended. Otherwise, if Correa doesn't make that play, and let's say Bichette stops at third base, they're going to have the bases loaded with the always dangerous Matt Chapman at the plate. And coincidentally, Chapman leads off the next inning with a single. Next, recently, Anthony Castrovinci, a writer for MLB.com, had an interesting article on lessons from the first season under the new rules. And one of those was the effect of banning the shift. At least those crazy kinds of shifts where the shortstop or the second baseman plays out in short right field. Well, this year, of course, teams were required to have two infielders on each side of second base, kind of what you'd call traditional positioning, and none of them were allowed to be out on the outfield grass. So who benefited? Well, mostly left-handed pull hitters, since they were the ones whom the shift was most often used against. The result? Their overall BABIP, now that's the batting average of balls in play, which basically means it's your batting average minus strikeouts. So when you actually hit the ball, what's your batting average? So the BABIP, the overall BABIP, increased from 12 points, from 283 to 295. And the batting average on balls in play for balls that were pulled, now that would include both ground balls and line drives, balls that were pulled, increased by roughly 30 points. So that's a big bump in batting average on balls in play. It varies a bit depending on whether it was a ground ball or a line drive, but still about 30 points increase in the batting average on those balls pulled to the right-hand side toward the first base, second base side of the field. So which individual players benefited the most from this? Well, honestly, I haven't found any end of season stats on that yet. Maybe somebody will come out with that. However, in July, Mike Petriello of MLB.com reported that the two players at that time, so that would have been about halfway through the season, the two players at that time with the largest estimated increase in hits. And it's an estimated increase because you can't be 100% sure about, well, whether this ball been an out. If they had been shifting, you could say, well, it would have been a likely out. So it's an estimated number of hits. But the two players who were benefiting the most were Jose Ramirez of the Cleveland Guardians, who interestingly is listed as a switch hitter, and Jarred Kelenic of the Mariners, who is a true lefty. So through the full year, looking at their actual batting average, Ramirez's batting average went up just slightly from 280 a year ago to 282 this year. So that doesn't seem to be much different. But his batting average on balls in play when he was hitting against right-handed pitchers, and I'm saying that because he's a switch hitter, so they're going to be doing the shift when he's batting left-handed, so this would really apply to him against right-handed pitching. But anyway, his batting average on balls in play when he's batting left-handed increased dramatically. It went up from 291 a year ago to 315 this year. So that is a 24-point increase when he's hitting left-handed. And as a note on that, the major league average for a batting average on balls put in play, well, most of the time people say it's around 300, but for 2023, it was 297. It was 297. So he was quite a bit above league average. And actually a year ago, it was 290. So a year ago, his BABIP was 291. The league average is 290. He was right about league average. This year, the league average was 297, but his, and we're talking about Jose Ramirez now of the Guardians, his was 315 compared to the league average of 297. Now, Kelenic is a little bit harder to look at in a sense because he's a young player. It was just last year was just his second season. It was a partial season. He was up and down between AAA Tacoma, and he just batted 141 in the majors last year. Not very good, but he's only 22 years old. And this year his batting average jumped dramatically. He went from 141 a year ago, which is, not good enough to even play in the majors, to hitting 253 this year. Of note, his batting average on balls in play, again, I did this just against right-handed hitters. Now, maybe because he's a lefty, I should have included both, but to keep it consistent with how I looked at Ramirez, I just looked at his BABIP against right-handed pitching. But a year ago, it was 156. Well, that would have been in line with his horrible 141 batting average. But this year jumped to 367. So a 200-point increase in his BABIP year over year. But I think more striking, because clearly he has made some progress. They worked on him with things in the offseason. He may have even had some injury issues. I'm not certain about that. But as a young player, you're going to expect progress anyway. It may be hard to judge how much of that is due to having the shift ban, but it clearly did benefit him because his BABIP of 367 was 70 points above the major league average. Remember, the major league average was only 297. So there is a dramatic difference there. So I think clearly Kelenic benefited. I think also clearly Ramirez did too. In summary, has banning the shift helped? And especially, does it help left-handed pull hitters? Yes, it does. So next up, our Blimerick, our baseball limerick that we have every episode. And this time it is a tribute to lefty hitters and the ban on shifts. So here we go. As a lefty, he needed a lift, kept grounding balls into the shift. With the ban now in place, as a hitter, he's an ace. Hit it where they ain't. That's a skill, not a gift. Next, a quick review of a baseball book I really enjoyed this summer. The book is called Mint Condition, and it's by Dave Jamieson, Jamieson. And I want to give a shout out of thanks to my friend Ron Bolstad, who loaned me this book. And if you're interested, Ron actually appeared as a guest on this show in 2 episodes in season 1, episodes 12 and 13, where we talk about what baseball has meant to him and specifically about the Pacific Coast League. So check that out. Anyway, the book is called Mint Condition, and it is the story of the baseball card industry, and it talks about other types of card collecting as well. But it is the history back to the days of the tobacco cards, which is fascinating, and also covers the card wars between the major companies, especially Topps, and how they kept a virtual monopoly on the industry for years. It also talks about the reliance of the players union on card sales for income and how the union used this money to help pay the players during some of the strike shortened seasons. So it really is, if you've ever collected cards, and really, I was not much of a card collector. I had just a handful of them. But I found it a fascinating read on the industry and card collecting in general, how cards are graded, just the whole idea of including something as a piece of marketing material, which is how the cards started out. They were just trying to help sell tobacco in the early days, and then later bubble gum. But at some point, anybody who collected these knows that the gum was lousy and you were buying the packs for the baseball cards. Anyway, I recommend it to you if you have any interest in that topic. Again, the book is called Mint Condition. The author is Dave Jamieson. Next up, our blast from the past. Recently, legendary Orioles third baseman Brooks Robinson passed away. So today we're featuring him on our blast from the past. let's talk a little bit about some of his stats and the things that he has done. Of course, he played for the Baltimore Orioles, the Hall of Fame third baseman. He played a handful of games at second base, but almost all at third base. He was an MVP winner, a multiple-time All-Star, a multiple-time Gold Glove winner. Let's take a little bit of a look. And so I'm using baseballreference.com here to look up some of his stats. So Brooks Robinson was a .267 lifetime hitter, batting average wise. He had a career .322 on base percentage, which is respectable, and on base plus slugging of .723, which for his career is 5% above average. He had a .105 OPS plus, but he was a very good offensive player, especially in some years. And notably, of course, he was known as the human vacuum cleaner and was an amazing defender. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but let's take a look at some of his stellar seasons. So his best overall offensive season would have been 1964, where he led the league in runs batted in with 118. He hit .317, had a .368 on base percentage, and he was voted the MVP. And of course, he did also win a Gold Glove that year. He played 23 years for those Orioles, beginning in 1955 at the age of 18. Now, he only had 22 plate appearances at age 18. And then at age 19, he had 45 plate appearances. So he just barely played those first couple of years. But by age 20, certainly by age 21, he is a full-time player. And he finished in 1977 at age 40, playing in just 24 games that year. But let's look at some of those overall career numbers that are so impressive, especially on the defensive end. So some of his career awards, he was in 18 All-Star games, in wins above replacement, which is a more modern method, but can still be used to go back historically and measure performance. In 1962, he was first in the American League with a 6.1 wins above replacement, which is outstanding. In 1964, when he won the MVP, he was also first with 8.1 WAR. Now, a good chunk of his WAR can be looked at defensively. So in defensive wins above replacement, so this is basically meaning comparing him to what the number of balls, the number of plays an average defender would have made. How did he compare to that? Or really, it's wins above replacement. It's looking at a replacement level player, like a AAA type of player. How far above that is he? So in 1967, his defensive WAR was first in the league. And in 1968, it was also first in the league. And for his career defensive wins above replacement, he's third overall. So that's terrific. And he had 14 seasons in the top 10 of wins above replacement. He also played nearly every game. And in many seasons, he did. In 1961, he played every single game. In 1962, he played every single game. 1963, he played 161 out of 162. 1964, he played every single game. And in 1968, he played every single game. So very durable player. And the other thing I wanted to look at was, besides his defensive WAR, he won 16 Gold Gloves. That's a kind of an easier stat to understand. The thing with Gold Gloves, of course, is they're voted on. So it's people's opinion about who's the best fielder, as opposed to maybe looking at the stats to help you determine who's the best fielder. But he led in defensive WAR. Also, if we look at some other defensive statistics, he was excellent. So another defensive statistic is runs above average. So it's called total zone fielding. It's runs above average, and it's really looking at how many runs above or below average was this player worth based on the plays they made. So like how many runs are they saving? So his runs above average for career, close to 300, 293 runs above average. That's outstanding. And also another defensive statistic is range factor, which is how many your range is judging how many balls you're getting to per 9 innings compared to the average player. So his range factor per 9 innings was 3.2 plays per game per 9 innings versus the league average of 3.09. So he consistently got to more balls. And anybody who watched him play, those incredible diving stops and hopping up and throws the first base and laying out and catching the line drives. I mean, clearly an amazing defender. And the statistic, what I like about it is your eyes told you he was a great player, a great defender, and the statistics also back that up. So great career, and condolences to his family, player who's certainly missed and has meant a lot to the game and to all of us. So finally, on to the answer to today's trivia question. It's been 30 years since the 2003 season. In that season, what team set their league's record for most losses in a 162 game season? And again, bonus points if you can remember how many losses that was without actually looking it up. So these were your choices. You had the 2003, the Padres, the Royals, the New York Mets, or the Detroit Tigers. Well, as most of you know who listen to this broadcast, I am a Tigers fan. And the answer to this, unfortunately, is the Detroit Tigers, who in 2003 lost 119 games, an American League record. The only team to do worse than that, as many of you will know, were the 1962 Mets in the National League, who lost a whopping 120 games. But if I had asked you what team lost the most games in history, or the most games on a 162 game season, I think a lot of you would have known it was the 62 Mets. So this one was a little bit harder. The 2003 Detroit Tigers with 119 losses. So that's all for today, my friends. Join us next time, because honestly, what can be better than talking baseball? As always, I'm your host, Phil S. Truth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.